Hey there, everybody. Have you ever wanted to make bricks that are so fearfully beautiful that your enemies stare across the battlefield and they start crying because they know their end is near? Have you ever wanted to make bricks so procedural that you can control not only the shape of them, but the color, how much dust there is, how tall it is, rotation, stuff like that? Well, look no further because this is the only brick tutorial you're ever going to need. Because of that, it's going to be very long and very complicated because we're going to make all of this procedurally, half of it in geometry nodes, and then once we have the mesh, the other half in shader nodes, giving this thing color, etc. So warning, this tutorial is going to be complicated, but what do you get out of it? Infinite peace, wisdom, and just the ability to go to sleep tonight knowing, yes, indeed, I know how to make some bricks. So let's get into it. So hopefully I showed some renders. This is kind of an example of what we're going to be making. And this kind of shows off the kind of useful procedural nature of it, because you can make this thing in complicated shapes, like bricks that wrap. That doesn't sound easy. And when you come in closer, you can see, oh, okay, these are pretty high quality bricks. They even go down to the detail over here. And we can control a bunch of parameters, as you saw. It's not that many nodes. Let's get into it. So the only thing you're going to need to follow along is a brain. And I know half of you are missing that, so, you know, out of luck. But seriously, have a new version of Blender. 3.0 should cut it. You should know that I am using 3.1 alpha. So if I use a node that you do not have, it's because I'm using a newer version. There's always workarounds, but I find that the newer version has the nodes that let us make this as quickly as possible. So I'd recommend having it. Before we start, I'm actually going to take the cube and do something I haven't done in a while. I'm going to get rid of it. This is an assassination. World War II is about to break out, but wait, there's a saving grace. Instead of the cube, I'm going to add in a curve. Why? The idea is we want to be able to make any brick wall. And to describe what brick wall I want, do I want a flat one? Do I want one in a circle, in a sine wave? The idea is we're going to describe it using this curve. So it's almost like this is like what's on the ground. And then along this arc, we're going to build upwards. So again, this curve is going to describe a arbitrary, brick wall. And it can be of any resolution, whatever. We're going to mess with that later. So once you have a curve object, now go into geometry nodes, and now the fun can begin. So make a geonodes group. So we have a curve. It has a geonodes modifier described by this node network. And the question is, what node network makes a brick wall? Well, if you think about it, we want to have this curve have a bunch of bricks, which is really just a bunch of cubes side by side by side. But we want to do that with different heights. So there's one layer of bricks and then another. So almost like a brick layer. We're going to build our brick wall, although instead of minimum wage, I feel like VFX artists also make minimum wage. So instead of doing it manually, we'll get minimum wage digitally. So we need to make layers, is the idea. How do I make layers of this curve so that I could then instance bricks? Well, we want to stack them vertically. So I'm going to do this using a mesh line. Mesh line is basically just a line segment composed of, in this case, I guess you can't see them, but 10 vertices. And we can change how many vertices that is. And every time we add a vertex, it's going to go up 1 unit in height. So you can think of these as layers. Either way, we want to use this to say, generate our layers as we go upwards. So I'm going to instance on points. I'm going to make a copy at every single point of what? Of our curve. So it looks like this. So we have our curve. It's customizable. You see, whatever we do, it applies to the rest of it. And it does that thing. Okay. Now, of course, we're probably going to go back, change the number of layers, the distance between them, but don't worry about that now. So we have some layers. Let's have 5. We then want to take this, and for each of them, each curve, add a row of bricks that sweeps along it. So here we're just doing the general idea. Well, to do that, we take our new mesh, which is just a bunch of instances, but they're stacked together. And on those, we're going to instance points. Kind of seems weird, but okay. And for each of these, we're going to instance a cube, which you can see is looking quite strange because it's only at the endpoints. So first of all, I'm going to take this cube and make it smaller so that they're not intersecting. And second of all, the question is, what gives? Why is our curve that is sweeping along this path, why does it only have the endpoints? Well, the way you want to think about this is this curve is composed of only 2 points. It's a Bezier curve. So what we need to do is for this input, I'm going to resample the curve and add more points. So again, what have we done here? We have a curve that I'm saying for each of these curves that we're going to stack have 10 points. We're going to resample the curve and say along it, go 1/10 of the way, 2/10 of the way, etc. And then that gets copied, and for each of these, we get a cube. And you can see how this is the basic idea of a brick wall. Now, of course, we have some issues. First of all, it looks horrible. But second of all, if this thing is too long, we only have a limited number of bricks. So we somehow need to have a function that tells us, hey, look at the length of the curve. And if it's long, add more bricks, because it's going to take more bricks to build a longer wall. Seems like it makes sense. So to do this, simple way, we're going to go to resample curve. And instead of saying, hey, always make 10 points, in other words, have 10 bricks and then however many layers, we're instead going to make this a function of length. And you can see now I'm going to pick a number that makes them spaced in a way that doesn't look weird. And the nice thing about this is you can see on the fly, it's adding and deleting bricks. Okay, so what's happening here, our curve is being resampled depending and as a function of its length. So while we have this, let's make some better looking bricks, which is basically just taking our cube and reshaping it. So again, we have this cube that we're copying a bunch of times. So I'm just going to take this opportunity to shape this cube to kind of look like a brick. So something like that. Maybe a bit thinner. I don't know. You can make a math function for this, but something like this. Now that we know what our brick looks like, we can actually say, okay, we know what the gaps should be in between the layers. Because remember, this is our stacking function. So I can make this a little shorter so that they now kind of connect in that sense. And in terms of length, which is the horizontal gaps, we can also control that. But you got to be careful. It's very sensitive, emotionally and numerically. Okay. Now, it's not the biggest deal if there's gaps in between our bricks. You could either make a custom mortar, or you could, just have them actually overlap or whatever. But I'm happy with this. So I'm going to take this. I'm going to add a bunch of layers. And by the way, behind the scenes look, I don't know who keeps texting me, but my phone keeps vibrating, and it's taking me out of the mood. So whoever's texting me, fuck off. Okay. We have a brick wall that no matter what we do has the correct amount of bricks and they're spaced out correctly. Next order of business, and there's a lot of business to conduct. Next order of business is you can see that the rotation of the bricks is incorrect. So yes, we have the correct number of bricks, but they're not really oriented correctly. By the way, I feel like this should be completely on the XY plane, so I'm just going to take this and move it down. You can see that our bricks aren't oriented correctly, like they're always facing the same way, which looks fine if it's like this, but if it's like that, there's some weird stuff going on. So let's take care of this next. How do we rotate our bricks? Well, what is rotating our bricks? Basically, we have a bunch of points. On each of these points, we have a brick. So if we rotate the original points, it's going to rotate the bricks. In other words, take this last instance on points and rotate it on the Z, and you can see, wow, it looks better. But we still have the same issue where now I move it somewhere else, and now it's, again, the incorrect rotation. So we need a rotation that updates depending on our curve. In other words, we need a function relative to the curve tangent. What is a curve tangent? Well, I'll explain by going on a tangent, that is. This is our curve. Our rotation should be kind of relative to which way this is facing. So you can see here it's facing this way, here it's facing that way, here it's facing this way. We call these vectors, these lines I'm drawing, the tangent, because it's going tangent. It's skidding the surface. So that should be what our function is. So either way, we have a thing for this. Go to curve tangent. I believe this works because what we have is a curve that we instance. So now it's a bunch of curves, which is still a curve. So take curve tangent. You could try to connect it directly to rotation, but you can see it does something weird. So to fix this, there's a node just for this. It's align Euler. It's a mathematician to vector. And you can see it's doing some weird stuff. So I'm just going to play with this until it's giving us the correct one. So ideally, we want to set it so that the tangent... Oh, wait. Boom. Make sure it's the second socket. We want to set it so that this is doing the correct one. It seems like X is correct. So again, take curve tangent, use this node to turn it into a rotation number, and boom, just like magic, you can see it's perfectly, no matter what we give, even if we extrude this thing, give more, it's always going to flow with our surface now. What this is going to let us do, by the way, is if I add in a new curve, this is what lets us make circles and stuff like that. And as we increase it, it increases the number of bricks and all that. Okay, let's add this back in. So far, we have a thing that makes bricks with the correct rotation. And that's kind of like the essence of it, really, right? Because we can make it however tall we want, we could make it whatever shape we want. And now the question is, how do we make it not look like garbage, okay? And I think that's going to be the rest of this video, so get ready. Things to address. One, all the bricks look exactly the same, right? They're all completely flush with the surface. None of them are a bit rotated or a bit jutting out like they are in real life. Another thing that's very jarring is all the rows are perfectly on top of each other. Depending on where you are, sometimes bricks are like half a unit kind of off. And by that, I mean, if we have a brick here and a brick here, on the second layer, usually we have one here. It's kind of like offset by half a brick length. And that goes back and forth. So let's do all of that. First of all, and actually the most complicated task, let's do that brick offset thing. In other words, remember, we have a curve. We instance the curve, and if we want to make our bricks kind of go a half brick off, hopefully you understand what I'm saying, we need to affect this curve. So how do we do that? Well, to do that, we actually need to instance not just one curve, but two different versions. One that looks like the original, but the other that has this half brick offset. So the question is, how do we calculate that? Well, here's how we do it. If you think about it, what is a curve? A curve, which we resampled, is a thing with a bunch of points, right? There's a point here, a point here. I'm drawing this horribly. Point here, point here. To do a half offset, we need to generate a new curve that looks exactly the same, but now our points are halfway in between. That's a half offset. So we need to calculate what that curve is. Super simple. Well, kind of. What we're going to do is we're going to take this curve and do that math operation. Well, how do we know what the vertices in between are? Well, we just take the positions of two nearby vertices and average them. If you take one and the next one, and you see where they are in the middle, the midpoint, that does it. So how do we do that? Well, this is where the new node I was talking about that you might need comes in. There's ways to do this with attribute statistic. I just wouldn't. Field at index, I think it's a 3.1 thing. But I think we're in beta now with 3.1. Either way, what it lets us do is take a attribute like position, like some piece of information we care about, and we can extract it at any index. So I can say, hey, look at the vertex with this index, index 15, look at the 15th vertex, and tell me what the position is. Well, if we want to take a vertex and the next one and average them, well, all we need to do is have two of these. One of these is just going to be using the index number, so it's going to say, hey, what's the position at whatever index? And again, index is this thing where we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's basically numbering the points on our curve. We want to take it and say, look at the index, and also look at the one after it, or before it. Doesn't matter. So index plus 1. So you can see, same idea. We're looking at the position, but at nearby vertices. We take this, and there's a bunch of ways to do this, but the simplest is we just take both of these, and I'm going to mix them together with a number of 0.5, which is basically saying average them. So basically, this attribute we made is the exact function we need to tell us where the new locations should be, right? We calculated the midpoints. Well, to actually implement this, we're going to take our curve, we're going to set position. Anytime you want to change the vertices, we need to set the position of those vertices to this new position. So let's see what that looks like. So you can see, here's the original. Top view is probably better. Here's the original curve. Here's the new one. It looks almost exactly the same, but you can see there's a bit of an offset. And there's actually also a bit of a problem where you can see there's this thing added at the end. Why is that? It's because at this last vertex, it's looking at the position, and then it's looking at that plus 1. There is no 1 after that, so it has to do this weird going halfway to the origin thing. A simple solution to that is we're just going to delete geometry so that it gets rid of the last, the one with the biggest index. So a good way to calculate that, because that's going to be changing on the fly depending on how long our curve is we want to look at the index, take an attribute statistic. For this modified one, we want to look at the index, and I want to say, hey, look at the biggest one, the maximum index, and delete that one. So let's see, here's before, here's after. Did it work? No, because that makes no sense. We want to say anything that's bigger than, hold up. We want to take any index that's bigger than the maximum and do that. And that should almost work, except I think we need to do that -1. So let me do that and then explain what we did here. Okay, so here's the thing before with the kind of rogue vertex on the way to destroy the Death Star and all that. Here's the one where we pruned it. How did I do that? Well, again, we know that the rebel, the degenerate, I mean, it's not doing anything wrong, but the degenerate vertex is the one with the largest indice. So I'm looking at attribute statistic. Tell me stuff about the index. I want to find which one is the maximum, and then subtract 1 because of indexing starts at 0. Don't worry about it. And we want to say, for any vertices that have an index greater than or equal to the maximum minus 1, which is basically saying, tell me which one's the last vertex. For that one, for that selection, delete it. Okay? Long story short, we have a curve, and we have this one that's offset by 1. Okay? And we want to go back and forth between instancing one and the other so that we don't just have a bunch of curves stacked, but it goes one and the other. To do this, there's probably a cleaner way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make 2 instance on points, one to instance the original curve and one to instance the offset one. So, by the way, I guess saving wouldn't be a bad idea. Available on Patreon. That's what I'm calling it. Link in the description. No, don't need to talk about that anymore. Let's get back into the tutorial. So we have one version of this, which is the curve stacked, and one version of it with the offset ones. You can see it looks a bit different. And we want to go back and forth. It oscillates. So one way to say that is row 1 should have the original curve, row 2 the other, row 3 the original, back, forth, back, forth. What is back, forth, back, forth? It's odd, even, odd, even. So a good way to do this is we want to look at the mesh line, which again is saying the layers. And we want to say for an even index, instance 1, for an odd index, instance the other, is kind of the trick for this one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this mesh line and I'm going to separate the geometry into 2 parts, a selection and an inverted selection. How am I going to make it? Well, I'm going to say, look at the index. Tell me if it's even or odd, and that will separate it, okay? So look at the index, take it mod 2, which is basically just a fancy way. Where the fuck is mod? Am I going crazy? There it is. Take it mod 2. This is basically a fancy way of saying, hey, take the index, which is an integer, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, divided by 2. If the remainder is 0, output 0. If the remainder is 1, output 1. Basically tell me if it's odd or even. Take this, connect it to selection, and you can see now, hopefully, we have half the vertices and then the inverted. So you can see it's kind of flipped in some sense. So let's try it like this. So we have the selection here and then the inverted selection here. So again, we have 2 instances, instance on points, one for one type of curve and one for the other. And they're oscillating. So what we want to do is take both these layers. So it's not just laying one layer bricks, but it's taking both. And we just want to join them. And let's see what that looks like. So you can see it's basically the exact same thing, but now our bricks are offset by half a brick. But we did something subtle here, something I actually had to go back and do for my original. Instead of just averaging them, I just used this mix, which is the same thing. But notice we have a slider. So we can actually control the offset. Whoa, and the math just works. So there is reason to do like a 40% offset or whatever, but just so you know, now we have a nice slider that controls that. And you can see it doesn't have that issue. If we didn't do the delete geometry, you can see what that does. So we got rid of that issue. And this is all procedural. Yeah, baby. So it's all coming together now. So again, we're just doing the final kind of steps to make this look better. So let me make a kind of a longer wall with a bit more going on. Something like that. It's kind of cool that we can control this with a curve. So we have something like this. Let's just add kind of height to this. So it all just kind of works. We want to make this look a bit more scattered and random. And again, one way to do that is have some bricks tilted, some of them jutting out. So let's have both of those, or at least one of those effects. To do this, how do we do this? Well, remember, basically all of this is our oscillating curves, and then we instance the cubes. What we want to do is have some of our points, each point per cube, have some of them be a bit rotated. And that should do it. So let's see, our rotation's already taken up. So let's see what happens if we just add a bit of something. I'm not sure which, I always forget if it's X, Y, or Z, or even something else. But I'm just going to test all of these. It seems like Y is kind of correct, so maybe we could do something with the Y axis to randomize this. Another thing to try, so we already have one solution, is maybe we can use this vector socket here. So let's see, X, flips it along here, which is kind of cool. Y does the other way, and Z doesn't. Okay, looks like we're just going to be doing vector math, which is fine. In other words, I think it was Y. Yeah, we want to randomize the Y, so it's not all the same. To do this, I'm going to make a custom randomized vector. So I'm going to combine X, Y, Z. We want to randomize the Y component. So let's do the fancy way where we can just type it in. Connect a random value. And you can see what this does is it looks a bit weird, but it randomizes. So some of them are rotated some way, some the other, etc. The only thing you might be noticing, if you have a keen eye, oh, hold up, I need some water. I told you. Did I say that I was sick in the beginning of this tutorial? I am. I've been doing this whole thing with a sore throat. That's how much I care. And I had this bottle of water to get me through it, but I haven't been using it. If you have a keen eye, you can see, yes, the rotation's randomized, but every column is the same. So it's almost like the first row is randomized, but then it just takes that and copies it above, which makes sense because that's exactly what's happening. We have a curve, and then we instance it above. I mean, yeah, it's alternating, but whatever. So it's not really randomized. To fix this, we want to make sure it's not instances anymore. So it's not just a bunch of curves we copy. So to do that, just use a realize instances, and boom, you can see everything's randomized. So now it's actually looking at each point, and for each point, it's giving it a random rotation. Let's control it. So we can say the rotation's between 0 and 1, so we can make that, a bit softer. I find that a nice way to do this is you have a value. This is going to be our control. And I'm going to center this at 0. So I'm going to have one of these. That's just the negative. So I'm just multiplying it by -1. It's the same number, but it's times -1 maximum. And what this lets us do is now we have a single number that controls the randomness. So it's going from -1 to 1 or -0.1 to 0.1. Makes it so that can rotate clockwise or counterclockwise. But now you can see we have this nice little slider. Just add a bit of variation. Don't make it crazy, but it adds something. So here is before and after. Adds a lot. Second thing we can do, like I said, is have some of these jutting outwards, so not just rotated, but actually jutting outwards. And that, instead of rotating the point that generates the brick, sorry, I'm sick, is actually moving the point that generates the brick. That's how we want to do that. So here's how I am going to do this. So we have this thing with realized instances. It's made up of a bunch of points. If I want to move those points again, every time you do that, set position. And connect that here. So you can see nothing changed, but now we can do some offsetting and stuff like that. To make it offset kind of outwards and inwards, so in and out of the wall, we want to go relative to the normal of the wall, the way that's perpendicular to it. So let's literally just use a normal. You could do some curve tangent stuff, but I believe this works. So I'm going to offset relative to the normal, and you can see indeed it did kind of move outwards, kind of like extruding. What I want to do is have a control for that. So let's do a scaling on that vector. So now you can see we have quite a bit of control here. I think this is correct. We'll see. So when this is 0, doesn't do anything, then we can make it go a bit outwards, bit inwards. Whatever. Let's try randomizing it. So the scale is yet another thing that we can try randomizing. So I'm just going to copy this setup from before. Just move it up here so it's just another random thing. And let's see what this does. So I'm going to set this to 0 so it doesn't do anything. There we go. Now, I don't think this is technically exactly correct because I think we're doing moving and rotating kind of in one pass instead of translate instances. So this isn't exactly correct, but it gets the job done. So I'm just going to move these a bit. So you can see how they're going in and out of the normals with a bit of rotation. So again, before, after, and let me show without rotation and jutting out. It looks boring, but now with jutting out and rotation looks much more interesting. So, okay, review. What do we have? We have a curve. It generates brick walls. It has the offset thing and also the randomization. So remember, we can always offset this, which is kind of cool. Okay? And we can make all kinds of curves behave this way. Okay. Maybe final thing is let's add a tiny bit of a bevel to these bricks, and then let's just get to the materials already, To do this, we have our geometry nodes. That's just a modifier. We want to take all this and bevel it. And until we have a bevel node, we use a bevel modifier. So let's bevel. You can see it's not doing anything, and I made this mistake in the last tutorial. I'm like, I don't know what's wrong. It's because we're not sending geometry information to this bevel, so there's nothing it can do with it. Make sure to realize instances, just like last time. So it's actual geometry, and now you can see the bevel is working. So I'm just going to add 2 segments worth of bevel and make it a bit more of a rounded brick. I guess maybe one more thing we can do. Yeah. Yeah, okay, let's just add one more layer of randomness. So we have rotation, we have moving. Let's actually have the bricks not be perfect blocks as well. And I'll just do that in a simple way. So after all this, I'm going to set position. So I'm just going to add some distortion at the end. I'm going to offset it with some noise texture, which is going to make it do weird stuff, as you can see. But you can see it's kind of breaking up the bricks. To fix this, take your noise texture, and right now it's adding some number between 0 and 1 on the X, Y, and Z axis. To normalize it, kind of, subtract by 0.5 so that instead of shifting it on average 0.5 on the X, Y, and Z, we're moving it back. Because before, you could see it kind of shifted everything upwards. This moves it back, and then we're going to scale it to make it less intense. So you can see how this is kind of breaking up the bricks a little. And it doesn't really have much geometry to work with, so maybe there's an argument for each cube. We are going to subdivide it just a little. You can see now we have more geometry to work with. Let's do 2 levels of division, although it does add quite a bit of geometry. Whatever. 2 levels of division, and let's make this way softer. So now you can see it's kind of breaking up these bricks in a nice random way, but no bricks are going to intersect because we're having this apply to everything all together at once. So I'm going to make it a bit softer. So this is just the quality of the noise. Bit softer. And let's make it 60% as strong. There we go. So again, before, after. So this adds quite a bit of randomization, actually. I like the look of that. And you could, if you don't like the facetting, you could try setting shade smooth. Although it might make it look kind of too buttery. Okay. So it does that, and then it does the bevel. So I think we're done with the geometry. To get this looking better, just add more detail. It's the same idea, but not too bad of a node network. Let's do the material, which is super simple. So I'm going to set material, because again, you set materials inside geometry nodes. It's all part of the modifier. And for this material, we just got to make it look like a brick. So super simple stuff. I say as, getting into something complicated. So in the material, first of all, let's make sure that the material is affecting the thing. So let's go to rendered view, and indeed, it's linked because we have the material, set material. We need to make it look like brick. Before we do that, I'm just going to set our environment so we can actually tell if it's doing it correctly. So I'm going to go into cycles, and then for the lighting, I'm just going to use an HDRI lighting, as always. Let's do a outdoor one. So yeah, that looks real good. Now you can see the lighting very into shadows and all that. Yeah, so just pick an HDRI that looks good. And now the name of the game is, again, making a material that looks good. First thing I want to do is I want to pick a bricky color, but I want to make sure that each brick isn't the same color. In fact, it should be also randomized. To do this, I've talked about this trick quite a lot, so I'm not going to get too much into it. Take a geometry node, go to random per island, and you can see what this does is it generates a number between 0 and 1, random, for each island, each piece of topology that isn't connected to another. And that's exactly what we have. We have a bunch of cubes that aren't connected. They're next to each other, but they're not connected. By the way, if this isn't working for you and you see all one color, it's because realize instances isn't here. You have to do this so that it's actual geometry, and then it can find where those islands are. So random per island. We now send through a color ramp, so we want to filter this through some color selection. So, we could have some black and some blue, as you can see. But we want to pick brick type colors. So I'm going to pick kind of like a beige red thing, connect that to base color, see how that looks. It's getting there. The black, make it more gray. The red, also make it more gray. And you'll get something that looks a bit more like brick. Again, play with this more to get a more realistic thing. But even that looks pretty real to me in terms of color. Now to make it look like a brick, everything's kind of too smooth and perfect. So I'm going to break this up with some normal mapping. With a bump, we can take a noise texture and convert it into normal information. So take this, connect it to the height. You can see we have normal information, make it way tinier so we have a lot of detail. And let's see what that looks like. So that should really roughen up our bricks. Scale of 300. you know what? Maybe we could use a object coordinates instead of generated coordinates so it's nice and even. Yeah. So the issue is generated coordinates stretch with this approach. Okay. So I think that is already helping. Our bricks, I feel like they're rough, but are they a bit shiny? I don't know. I'll increase the roughness a bit so they're not that reflective. Other things we can do. So it's already looking pretty good, but it just kind of looks like a bunch of clay still. So we need to give this thing a bit more like cement kind of feeling. I think two ways we can do that. One, we want to, instead of having a gradient, let's sample a couple colors. So I've added some things. So we have this color, this one, this one. I'm going to set it to constant, and I'm going to sample from left. So now it only has 4 choices instead of a continuum, so that it looks more manufactured. And also, let's add some like, not an offensive word, some chinks, some deterioration in the bricks. I think that should look good. To do that, bunch of ways to do that, probably even with geometry nodes, but I'm going to take the lazy approach, and I'm going to take some water too. I'm going to use a noise texture to kind of break up these bricks a little. So with this noise texture, I'm going to make the scale really big so we have a lot of detail. And I'm just going to say, hey, tell me where it's greater than some number, which is going to end up making these little clusters. And in fact, just like last time, let's use object coordinates. There we go. And I want to make sure there's not too many, so really filter it. Okay, so I've generated a bunch of splotches. So again, we just took noise texture very fine and said, you know, where is it bigger than a number? Let's also make it higher detail and higher roughness, which means we need to bring this back down. So you can see this is the wear and tear. And I think the idea here is we're going to take the color and add a bit of nonsense, right? So I'm going to mix it with this mask. And this mask could have, yeah, this color looks pretty good. That kind of looks like brick deterioration. So it could be gray, darker gray, whatever. That looks pretty good. And also make sure, since we have a bump node, let's also have this work our way through the bump so we can subtract away this. So it actually has a normal mapping stuff. And I think that's pretty convincing. You don't want it to be too plentiful, again. But you could play with that and get different looks. Right now it might be a bit much, but you can make it look like a lot. Okay, I'm kind of happy with that. Another main thing we can do is add the mortar, kind of, the impression of it, so kind of like, or maybe dust accumulating in between the bricks. Let's do that. Fastest way to do it, again, in material, ambient occlusion node is going to tell us where is there self-shadowing. Let's look at it. Look, it's nice and black in between. Take this, send it through a color ramp, make it high contrast, something like this, so you can see now we're getting this nice mask that we can do stuff with. Mix it, use it as a factor. I think this is going to be the big step that makes it look real. Yeah, that's that dust accumulation. So just pick things that make sense, kind of like a white dust accumulation. And again, we can control this using the color ramp. Don't make it too intense. Something like that. I want to make sure that in case we have another mesh involved, which could generate more ambient occlusion, I believe. Let's see. Yeah, you can see there's a lot of dust down here. You can make sure this is set to only local, so it's not using ambient occlusion with other stuff, or take this distance and bring it down so it's not looking as far, because I guess there should be some dust down here. So I think that looks pretty good. I'm trying to think what else I would add to my brick generator. I mean, at this point, I just kind of mess with some numbers, especially since we have our nice procedural material set up. So ambient occlusion depends on how close things are. So maybe we don't want as much of a gap. And again, we know how to control that. So now these bricks are much closer. And again, everything here is procedural, right? We just basically took a curve and made this. So we can do the brick offset. So they're all lined up. Or like roughly or perfectly halfway not lined up. We could take the original curve, don't forget, and move it. I guess you want to move it in a way that's on the XY plane. And as long as this thing is sufficiently smooth, it's going to work. And let's just do the final test here, which I always like. Circle. Make it a big circle. Be worried, the bigger you make this, the more geometry it's going to take, of course, because there's more bricks. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Only thing is, of course, there's a bit of a seam, but what are you going to do? You know, you can play around with numbers until that's fixed. But I think that's pretty good. So we have bricks that do a whole bunch of shit. And don't forget, we also have the obvious controls, like the height. Let's make it taller. Boop, taller. Let's make it way taller. It's going to take a lot of geometry. There we go. So if you wanted actual geometry-based bricks, now you got them, okay? This isn't the most efficient approach, of course. Oh, and by the way, one more thing before I do the outro. Again, we have full control over the randomization here, so I'm going to make the bricks really jut out here. Yeah, that looks like a real thing that was built. So, of course, we have control over all this. This isn't the most practical approach, but it is one of the most realistic approaches because it's actually geometry-based and it looks good. So I think at this point I'm going to wrap up. My voice is going, and we've been going for 35 minutes, so that's good. Either way, if you enjoyed this tutorial, I should let you know, and this is an advertisement, but it's the one you actually want to hear. I should let you know I have a Patreon. If you want to get this blend file, or really the original bricks I made, you can get that on the Patreon, link in the description. Let me tell you about it. So there's nearly 760 active patrons for this channel and CG Matter. Thank you guys, by the way. What they get in return, other than supporting these two channels directly, that is the most direct way to do it, to fund. Early access to tutorials. You could have seen this tutorial early, probably a day early or 2 days early in this case, sometimes up to a week early. Project files, you could have gone this blend and any blend I've uploaded over the last 3 years, which is hundreds. You can download them all at once. I already said that. Exclusive tutorials, I try to do one a month, sometimes a tutorial series a month. That's the highest rank. So either way, watch tutorials earlier than everybody else, especially if that's a tutorial series that's useful. Download the project files. Recently I did a crater tutorial, so that's there. And exclusive tutorials. So either way, if you like those benefits or you just want to support my channel and don't care about any of that, Patreon link in the description. Thank you for watching, and I need to calm my throat down. I don't think anybody's ever made a better brick tutorial. Screw you guys. The king is back.